The basic problem in this is that there's an expectation that somehow or the other, if we create structures in terms of facilitation, that itself will impress international investors to come in. The Middle Eastern investors, somehow or the other, if they see that they're given preferential treatment, that somehow if they're treated in a very beneficial manner, that they'll bring in huge amounts of investment. But really, it's pretty naive, this approach. Again, a huge deal of expectation built up around his coming. There were several visits by our ministers, including our prime minister, to Saudi Arabia. Then there was some investment minister who came, from foreign minister from Saudi Arabia came, then the investment minister came, then a delegation came. And having all that happen, we saw that suddenly, without any clear indication of why, MBS's visit has been postponed indefinitely. What is the merit of a project standalone by itself without any subsidies, or if it doesn't stand on its own merit, then the chances of an investor coming in become low. Then you start saying, well, we'll give tax concessions. We are creating for our future generations problems. And these CPEC contracts have now become a mill around our neck. We are finding that there's a liability of anything between 3 to 4 billion that has to be paid every year. Our electricity tariffs have to be increased. One of the main reasons is the capacity payments. 70 to 75% of your payments in your electricity bill are capacity payments, and these are largely because of these very onerous IPP contracts that were signed.
Watch Federal Post. Bold and independent.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. मैं हूं हसन जफर and you're watching Talking Politics. I'm joined by Javed Hassan sahab. He is an economist and he's a columnist in Arab News. Javed Hassan sahab, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Hassan Zafar. Thank you very much for inviting me once again. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure, always a pleasure indeed. I would like to straight away start talking by this Special Investment Facilitation Council that was created almost over a year ago. Why hasn't any money come into this or through this?
Okay. Dr. Zafar, this was started with a great deal of fanfare and optimism. This is a very high-powered facilitation council where numerous bodies, agencies, some of the most important departments and stakeholders in the economy were supposed to have been participants in it, including some of those from the security apparatus. And it was expected that they'll have the ability to muster all forces necessary to bring in huge amount of investment. And there was talk initially of 100 billion, and then 75 billion, then 50 billion. Then that came down to, in September last year, the outgoing, the previous caretaker prime minister said 25 billion. And recently that was toned down to Saudi Arabia to 5 billion. So there's been a gradual erosion in terms of how much this is supposed to have generated. The basic fact is that, bilkul. The basic problem in this is that there's an expectation that somehow or the other, if we create structures in terms of facilitation, that itself will impress international investors to come in. The Middle Eastern investors, somehow or the other, if they see that they're given preferential treatment, that somehow if they're treated in a very beneficial manner, that they'll bring in huge amounts of investment. But really, it's pretty naive, this approach. And I have to say this, it's extremely naive. The investor globally, for a start, is looking at the overall economy and the structure of the economy, in that will it facilitate reasonable returns. given the risks that prevail in the country. If the overall economic structure is such that it is not affording decent returns to domestic investors, why should afford huge returns to some external investors? And moreover, the projects that were talked about were somewhat questionable. We already are having huge problems in the power sector. Some of our previous investors, we are not necessarily paying them their dues on time. There's some question marks about CPEC, as much as 2 billion or 2.4 billion dollars being in abeyance in terms of payments. If they are not being paid on time, if there are delays in that, why should a new investor feel confident that they'll not, in due course, also suffer similar indignities? So, look, it's been so far not successful at all. We was hoping to see Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, come here, and there was again a huge deal of expectation built up around his coming. There were several visits by our ministers, including our prime minister, to Saudi Arabia. Then there was some investment minister who came from the foreign minister from Saudi Arabia came. Then the investment minister came. Then a delegation came. And having all that happen, we saw that suddenly, without any clear indication of why, MBS's visit has been postponed indefinitely, and this was
Yes.
before his the concerns about his father's health. So there was something else that is happening, and I think the simple reason is they have gone through the proposals that have been presented to them. They have looked at the overall economy, and they have not been particularly impressed. It is not by just giving them huge amounts of welcome and treating them like royalty, even delegation, that people will invest. People go to all sorts of places, even if they are not particularly treated like royalty. But if they see an investment opportunity where there is going to be great returns, people bite your hands off to invest there. So
Yes.
I think we have a completely wrong approach in terms of investment and what attracts investment. Uh, if our overall economy is such that domestic investors are not investing, it is very unlikely that you'll have huge amounts of investments from foreigners, even Gulf investors. And it has to be said, Gulf investors are very savvy now. They
Yeah.
have
I have
people.
two questions from this initial observations. A, um, we don't have our local investors uh, investing in Pakistan. So how can we expect foreign direct investment coming into Pakistan? Our own investors move to other countries. Our industrialists are moving to other countries. Two, what do you think is conspicuously missing uh, in the environment that you mentioned that really uh, stopped these Middle Eastern investors to come in Pakistan?
See, if you have to think about it, we are not at creating enough attractive projects, which, because of the overall economy and the structure of the economy, because of the productivity, the efficiencies in our economy, create value for any investor, whether it is a domestic investor or an international investor. Any investor looks at the project and sees what sort of returns it will give without any special favors, without any exceptional tax concessions. First of all, they want to see what is the merit of a project standalone by itself without any subsidies, or if it doesn't stand on its own merits, then the chances of an investor coming in become low. Then you start saying, well, we'll give tax concession. Then you start saying we'll give them a special guarantee. Then you start saying the subsidy. Now, when you start going down that route, then effectively the investors knows that this is not something that endogenously by itself is generating sufficient returns. You're having to do something over and above which the economy may not be in the future be able to afford. So that's what happened with our CPEC power projects. We offered phenomenal returns, but our economy can't sustain that kind of huge IRRs that many of these projects involve. And that was the basic flaw. The return on equity in dollar terms was as high as 18, 19%. The IRR was as high as 34, 35%. Fundamentally, very few things in our economy can generate naturally that kind of return. So they knew, those who invested, that this was supranormal profits, which was not sustainable. And now people are seeing the effects of that, in terms of honoring those contracts, it is becoming difficult. So if they are going to be future investors, they'll know, why should we be confident that those who have not suffered in the past, we won't have the same fate? So I think we have to look at what is the underlying structure of the economy. The underlying structure of the economy right now, there are huge amounts of inefficiencies. There are huge amounts of distortions in terms of pricing. Probably our currency may be overvalued. We don't have enough efficiency. Our productivity is low. So without addressing those things, if we expect a lot of investment, we are deluding ourselves. So the local investor is, there's an expression in English which says that the canary in the coal mine, and the canary is the, when it sort of dies, you know that there's something wrong. There's poison in the coal mine shaft. And the domestic investor is like that canary in the coal mine. If he is leaving or not investing, it is a very clear signal to the international investor that there's no really natural competitiveness or reason to invest in this country. And moreover, the kind of projects we were uh, offering were not something that were leading to great amount of exports. So we already have a balance of payments constraint. We are constantly running out of foreign exchange. So even if they did have huge amounts of profits or exceptional returns guaranteed, what was there to give them the confidence that those guarantees will be honored? So,
Yes. So what I understand, that the kind of promises we make and the kind of offers we make, it a makes us look desperate. To the amount of profits that we promise to attract foreign investment becomes our own liability in the end, and we are not able to honor the those promises. So okay,
indeed,
yes,
you're
please.
absolutely right. I mean, and that is actually a great problem. We are creating for our future generations problems, and these CPEC contracts have now become a mill around our neck. We are finding that there's a liability of anything between 3 to 4 billion that we has to be paid every year. Our electricity tariffs have to be increased. One of the main reasons is the capacity payments. 75%, 70 to 75% of your payments in your electricity bill are capacity payments, and these are largely because of these very onerous IPP contracts that were signed.
You think with China in terms of CPAC, we need to renegotiate or rethink the TORs of
If it were,
all the projects that have been initiated already?
ideally we should. I think they are really unsustainable as things stands. But it depends whether China would be willing to do so. We undertook those projects with our eyes open. We were grown up people. We were not. There wasn't a gun put against our heads to sign
Yes,
those. So China could very well say, "Well, you were perfectly happy to sign it. You were insisting." In fact, what the negotiations at that time, China wasn't insistent on having these IPP contracts. It was us who wanted the CPEC IPP projects.
hmm. So those individuals who were involved, maybe they had their own interest in it. Who knows? But apparently,
I cannot speculate on that, but in terms of purely financial rationale, there seems to have been incredible incompetence. If there was not any miscreants, and let's assume there wasn't any malfeasance. If we leave that aside, it was incredible degree of incompetence. That is for certain.
And
That
that's
one can
even worse. That's even worse.
that's always worse.
Yes. Oh, you talked about MBA's and MBS's visit to Pakistan. Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, had shown interest in agricultural projects in Pakistan. It was like 10 years ago, and we heard things like, I think it was even discussed in the assembly sometime, uh, that they wanted to lease maybe 100,000 acres of land or even more. Do you think we should do that kind of arrangement with Saudi Arabia? We should lease out land for 100 years, 100,000 acres,
See,
something like that, or
if it
even more?
is Dr. Zafar, if it is done on market basis, we should be a country free for business. If it is done on that, they come, they buy 100 acres through the market bidding process, through normal competitive process, and then have farms which are corporatized without any exceptional advantage in terms of taxation or anything else, and get water in the same manner that every other farmer gets, so that water isn't diverted from other farms and other areas to their particular farms, then I say with open arms welcome any investor and every investor. But when there is talk that there'll be exceptional advantages provided to such investors in agriculture, then one has to be very careful, and one has to be also asking that why do you need to provide such exceptional returns? As always, if any investor goes anywhere in the world, the whether it's the Gulf investors, they have, it is not as if they have bought farmland only in Pakistan. They've bought it in many countries, in America, in Canada, in Australia. There they did not seek exceptional terms and advantageous terms. So the question is there a level playing field? And this is one of the issues with SIFC. It seems to remove the level playing field that is incumbent. And it is interesting, IMF has also commented on that, and it has said that it will look to see that there is basically a level playing field in all our investment opportunities from whoever it comes.
Yes. For example, if we go to any Gulf country, especially Saudi Arabia, and I want to start a business there, I need to have a local partner there,
Yeah.
a local Saudi partner in the business. Shouldn't it be on the same basis when they come to invest in Pakistan? We should insist that whatever projects you initiate, you should have local partners, um, regardless of whatever the percentage of partnership.
I'm indifferent on that. That's my personal view. I mean, if Nestle comes and they are 100% owners and they bring in the right investment and they create value and they can export from here, I really don't think it's important to have local partners. If there is going to be corporatized farming, and they come in and bring in efficiency, new seeds, new agricultural technology, and improve our yields, then saw bismillah, as they say. Please come and invest. We should not be restrictive in that manner. But where I do have a question mark is when uh, advantageous terms are provided at the disadvantage to local investors and local farmers. And that it inherently suggests that there is not it is not competitive. That's why you're giving these extra advantages, and actually it will also raise suspicion in those who are investing, and that is one of the reasons I feel that they haven't come in. Because if we had not made it so attractive, they probably would have said, well, this is a interesting place, let's come and invest.
Yes, yes. But given my mind is stuck on that project. The 100,000 acres of land. I mean, if that is one piece of a big piece of land leased out to a foreign investor, it would become a huge piece of real estate. and one can have their own guards, their own security, whatever. So it could turn into a state within state. Would
So
you want
that should
that it
never be
should be
allowed.
cut into pieces? We should.
That there should be, ideally, yes, there should be some safeguards against that. Our sovereignty and jurisdiction should never be challenged. Every piece of land that is in Pakistan should have the laws of Pakistan applied to it. Any investor who comes to it has to abide by those laws, and our uh, police forces. It should not have separate policing. Really, it would be most disastrous both for the investor, because it will automatically cause resentment among the local population. There was some there was some question marks about developing a desert area or semi-arid area, Cholistan, where
Yes.
actually one of the investors from, I think, the Gulf countries, who knows the area quite well because they used to come for hunting there. They said,
100%, yes.
yeah, they said, well, we know this area. There's not enough water. How can we do wheat farming here? And then they were suggested that we will have a pipe water drain from Satluj to to this area. And they said, well, when they did a feasibility, it was just too expensive. Then there was talk of uh, having a canal built. That itself has its own drawbacks in terms of evaporation. Then there was talk of tapping into the aquifers, which has its own ecological issues. So really, I think these are very much fanciful ideas that the people on the drawing board seem to develop, and anyone who has practical understanding of these things becomes skeptical. So I think the whole process have been, it seems to be, while there's a lot of good intention, it seems to be a bit amateurish.
Right. So, what do you see coming through the budget that's going to be? I mean, it's a little premature to talk about it, but if whatever ideas we have about the present government's economic plans, uh, how does it look?
Okay, this is a $1 million question you asked me, and it's a very tough one, because what is, to me, and again, it's a personal view, is that other than relying on this huge amount of investment that was supposed to come from Gulf, there was no clear plan for the future. The hope was
Mm.
that the economy will be stimulated and suddenly revived because of the huge amount of investment that was supposed to come through. In the absence of that, there doesn't seem to be any plan B. I always was skeptical about economy being revived because of investment from abroad. That's not how economies really perform. We have seen this. CPEC was supposed to be a game changer. It never was a game changer. Game changer is when you actually transform your own economy, take difficult decisions, change the industrial landscape, make it more competitive, open up the economy so that integrate it with the rest of the world. Those are game changers. But there doesn't seem to be any vision to do that. I have a very simple thing I would have looked for in this new budget, and the new program with IMF, which is being discussed, that we make sure that effective tariff rates come down from currently in effect, if you include the regulatory duties and anti-dumping duties and the various other duties other than the straightforward customs duties, it comes to come 25-30%. Now, if you if you really wanted to be competitive in the world, you need to reduce your duty structure. You need to be like other countries, like Vietnam, which is 3%, China, which is less than 3%. You need to integrate, and you need to compete on that basis. You need to be part of regional trading blocks, where there's free trade. But we don't seem to have that vision. So our vision is not about making ourselves more competitive, removing those uncompetitive industries, like I could name a few, just to name one, auto sector, for instance. But it is more about, let's get some freebies, and somehow or the other we will do very well. So that's one of the sort of glaring things I would be. I have not seen any indications that the new budget will include, nor the new program with IMF. There's no talk of that. Uh, uh, there's talk about increasing taxes by further burdening the middle classes. by having either some kind of carbon tax on petrol or some GST or some more taxes. It's always about more taxes, more spending, greater expenditure on various things which are considered
So it's not
necessary.
horizontal, it's going vertical. People who are already under tax, they are being burdened with further taxation. It's
It,
not that
and
expanding.
it and as we know, I mean, this is very basic economics. You can only tax so far. It will almost inevitably reduce productivity. It will inevitably deter investments. This kind of heavier taxes will not really spur the economy, and it comes from a total lack of imagination. That's where it is coming from. There is, in my view, and it's a humble view, but I have to, you've asked me to say what I feel. There doesn't seem to be any clarity of thought or a vision in terms of where the country goes. The vision is let someone bring in a bit of money, and if we get a bit of money, we'll be fine. It's a
Doesn't
beggar's
work like that,
attitude
really.
towards
Definitely.
towards.
Javed Hassan Saab, you said $1 million questions. I'm going to ask the $1 million question now, actually. If you were in charge of the investment in Pakistan, what are the crucial steps that you would like to take?
Okay, if I was in charge, and I don't think anyone will make me in charge, so there's no risk of that.
No,
But but
you never
if
know.
it were the case, I would one of the key things I would want to do is ensure that Pakistan as an economy integrates with the rest of the world. So I would bring down the duty structures and make economy more competitive. I'd be very clear that some of the industries, if they have to be mothballed, they have to be mothballed, but there'll be new industries that will emerge almost automatically. Resource reallocation. I would also not try and hold the currency at 280 or 275. That is completely unnecessary. If the currency has to go down, it has to go down, because the currency is one of the most important signaling mechanisms in the economy. At 350, a lot of things probably become very competitive in Pakistan, and international investors might pour in money if your currency is priced right. So I would really drift. What I would also do is focus a lot more money on human capital. So while I would take away money from certain sectors of the economy, even if they're considered strategically important, and I would double or treble the amount of investment in health and education. And what I would want to see is to see that it's spent from the local government level rather than at provincial or federal level. Uh, that's where the empowerment should be, and really very strict monitoring of how the schooling works, how vocational training happens. Those are the things I'd be doing. So yes, the government should be very much involved, but not in the manner where we are involved, where it is to provide subsidies and allow uncompetitive industries to continue. That's really been our role of the government, is been to protect some of the worst industries around. What we should do is try to encourage competitiveness, allow the emergence of new entrepreneurs, allow this economy to really show that its dynamism. And just like I've always seen Pakistanis in UK and America and Middle East, when they go there, they do incredibly well. There's no reason why they can't do incredibly well in Pakistan as well.
Yes, thank you very much for elaborating all this and being so open about it. One thing I would like to ask you from all these things that you shared with me, when you devalue the currency, when you allow it to happen, or as you said, it should stand on its right price,
Yes.
uh, inflation goes up, uh, purchasing powers goes down. How will you handle that?
That is absolutely true, and one has to be very mindful of that. And that's why I would say a significant portion, where we are spending 350 billion on SRs, we probably should be spending 2 trillion on SRs. We should cut down on bureaucracy, both the civil bureaucracy and the other kinds of bureaucracy in this country. We should severely cut that down and devote it towards supporting the poorest sections of our society. There are people like yourself and me whose lifestyles will be affected. But in the cause of the nation, we have to be prepared. And I have to say, it's a very short term thing. It tends to move back up very quickly once the economy starts reviving, because asset prices are being actually realistically priced. You start seeing investment coming, and people like us and those who are in the middle classes who might suffer initially also start benefiting. The inflation also is a short term thing. You start having that adjust quickly as well. But you can't sort of keep delaying this process of actually the right signaling mechanism, the right pricing, because otherwise you just keep sort of rolling along or bumping along the bottom. And that's what we're doing. We're stuck in this sort of 0.5%, 0%, 1% growth in an economy where population is going at 2.5%. This is just unsustainable, and the poorest people are suffering the most. Yes, so we must cater for the poor people, enlarge the SARS program, enlarge the health and education program, but cut down severely on many of the other expenditures. The number of ministries in the federal government probably should be only left to 5 or 6. Uh, so we have much less spending on bureaucracy. If it means re-looking at the pension scheme, so be it. We also, there's one thing we haven't touched on. We also need to look at debt restructuring. Really, all of this will be premised on the fact that at some point we need to do debt restructuring.
It sounds like a necessary surgery that we need to do very quickly. Any further delay will really complicate the problem even further. Thank you very much, Javed Hassan Saab. It
Thank
was
you for
really
having me.
fantastic. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure
It's a
talking to
pleasure.
you. And thank you very, very much for watching. Khuda Hafiz. Good night. Pakistan Zindabad.